in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining our webinar on LINKPlanner. With me I have Rachel Swindell, and she's one of our engineers that looks over the development of LINKPlanner. So as always, if you have any questions, please type them into the text box on the right, and we'll get to them in a Q&A at the end. So without further ado, here's Rachel.
Thank you, Colin. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining this webinar. This webinar is based on features that you'll see in the recently released v4.6.0, or later if you're looking at this in a later recording. So today we're going to take a quick look at the products supported, and then look at some new features we've added so far this year. And then I want to take a slightly deeper dive into spatial diversity because it keeps coming up, and we've done a few changes to it in the last couple of releases. So in the products we support, you can see we're building quite a list now. We've recently just added the PTP 670, and there's also some products that we're starting to retire out of the lists. But you know, I would like to reassure everyone that we don't remove retired products from LINKPlanner, as we're aware that you may have radios in stock still to be deployed, or you need to revisit installed links and look at alternate options. So the products stay there, they may just be a little lower in the list. So hopefully you won't have any problems working with older products. So moving on to the new features that we've put in for this year, I've separated this functionality between the unlicensed sub 6 gig band, the licensed 6 gig and upwards, and some general features. So we'll start off with the unlicensed. As I just said, PTP 670 is a new product line. It's an enhanced version of the PTP 650, which will be capable of supporting HCMP. That will be coming in the next release of LINKPlanner, and it's also got some enhanced security features. We're also introducing a new range of Cambium antennas across the 5.1 to 5.8 gigahertz band, which are available for selection with the PTP 670. So you might see some new part numbers there that you haven't been used to seeing before. The PTP 700 with the 0250 software release can now support up to 8 slaves, although this is dependent on bandwidth, so it's only the 40 meg bandwidth that supports an increase above the 4 that you can see in the previous releases. This release also introduces new symmetry options. Again, the options that are available are dependent on both the bandwidth and the number of slaves. So the maximum asymmetry goes up to 4 to 1, or the other way around at 1 to 4, but you'll see different options, and it will vary depending on whether or not you've got TDD sync enabled and what number of options and range you're at. The PTP 670 and 700 also now support the CMM5 as an additional sync option. In LINKPlanner, when the CMM5 is selected as an option for sync for these products, we've made some changes to the BOM on the master, because the CMM5 also can power the PTP 670 and 700, so we don't want to use the kit form, which also contained a power supply, otherwise you're going to end up with multiple power supplies. So when you select the CMM5, you might see some changes in the BOM that you may not have been expecting. On the 450 family, we've added in the 40 meg bandwidth and extended the 15 and 30 meg into the DFS regions. And also on the 450M, we've now introduced 5, 10 and 15 meg bandwidths. We've also updated the integrated antenna pattern and improved the receive sensitivity. So you may see some subtle changes in predictions between the older versions and this new latest release. The EPMP, we've added the 2.5 gigahertz version, which is primarily aimed at the Brazilian market. We've made some modifications to the way space diversity calculations work in the unlicensed, and we'll cover that in more detail later in the webinar. So in the licensed band, there have been several additions to the PTP 820 portfolio. The 4+0 and 2+2 STs are only available on the PTP 820C. On PTP 820 for both the 2+0 and 2+2 options, one of the things we have added is a new option in LINKPlanner to choose between aggregated paths. This is the default option and works sort of the same way that you've been seeing in earlier versions. When you have this selected, the two paths have the same TR spacing, bandwidth, modulation modes, and they share all those same equipment settings. And at this point you can see the performance both on the individual path length level and also aggregated up at the parent level of the link. But we've become aware that in some cases users have very different traffic requirements for each path, and therefore you might want to be using different configurations. So if you have this kind of situation, you can now choose the independent path option, and in that case then you'll be able to set up different bandwidths and modulation mode options on each path. But in this case, the performance will only be shown at the individual path level, and there is no aggregated performance shown at the parent level. We've also made a few changes on the PTP 800. We've retired out the indoor RFU for both the 800 and the 810. We've replaced some couplers that have become obsolete. Unfortunately, in the 6 gig band, we don't have any new couplers yet, so that means that you can't use the more complex link types with the 6 gig options on 800 anymore. We're also about to obsolete the dual pole antennas with OMK, so that's the integrated antenna that comes with the single port option with the orthogonal mount kit already incorporated in it. You can still use the standard dual pole antennas with the remote mount where you connect to each port individually. So we've been adding a few things onto the Google Map, and we'll cover those in more detail in the next few slides. We've also reordered the product choices. We were aware that in some of the bands, especially sort of the 5.4, 5.8, we were getting very long lists of product choices, a lot of which are now retired. So we've promoted all the current products to the top of the list, and then the retired products down at the bottom of the list. So they're all still there, they're just in a slightly different order. And this seems a good point to say that LINKPlanner is fully supported, and if you have any questions on things we've done or the problems you're having with it, then if you drop us an email, then we do respond to everything that comes in on that email address. So LINKPlanner now works in conjunction with American Towers, and we display the location of their towers within LINKPlanner. This makes it easier to use one of their towers as a site. So if you want to see the towers when you're in the Google Map view, then simply tick the box on the right-hand side to activate the American Tower sites. If you want to use a site or look at a site, then you can see this. Click on one of the American Tower icons, and then it will show you the details of the site, and you can see all the information there. If you then want to actually create that as a site in your network, then simply click the Create Network Site Here option at the bottom of that list of information, and you'll get the normal new site window will pop up, but it will already be populated with all the information on the site. Depending on what zoom level you're at, you'll either see the individual sites shown by the icon, or you'll see a number indicating how many sites there are in a given area. If you get that number, you can see clusters of them in the bottom left-hand side here where we've got numbers of sites. And if you see that number, you want to see the more details on that, then zoom into the area, and as you zoom in, it will break down into either smaller numbers or until you get to see the individual sites as well. At the moment in LINKPlanner, we're only populating sites that are actually within the United States of America. So if you have American Tower sites, but in other countries in the world at the moment, I'm afraid they're not within LINKPlanner. If you put a site on a map, but you've not yet connected it to a link or connected it up to an access point, then you can now reposition it on the Google Map view by simply dragging it to a new location, and then just select the OK on the panel that pops up. If you select cancel or click off onto another part of the window, the site will return to its original location. This can be useful if you've sort of been given a set of coordinates and it's popped it up on a building, but you know that rooftop and you know that it's actually sort of in one corner of it and moved it across. You can now move that around and put it in the right place. We've also changed the ability so you can change the color of your sites and your links using the standard default options in the same way that you can see them on the offline view. What we can't do at the moment, unfortunately, is you can't change the link style, so you can't have dashed lines. You can only get a solid line on the Google Map view. The site size and line thickness are controlled by using the sliders on the offline map view, and then it changes in both map views. So whilst we're just talking about positioning sites accurately on a building, when you go to the Google Map view, and certainly when you zoomed right in many places in the world, it doesn't happen everywhere. It depends on what information there is in the Google view. There are actually two options on the window you can see. The default option is the option shown on the bottom left-hand corner, where you're sort of in a top-down view looking straight down onto the map. If you want to locate your sites, we strongly recommend that you use that view. You can see I've put 4 sites there on the 4 corners of the building. If you then use the toggle button to go to the, it's more of an image view, often called a bird's eye view, and at this point you can sort of rotate and move around the buildings. It's all really nice when you're sort of trying to work to see what's happening. And it's quite useful when you're wanting to try and get a better estimate of the buildings, because it's easier to see how many floors and things there are. But these are definitely more images, and they're not vigorously geo-referenced, so that we can see as we move around the view, the points I put in are no longer in the same positions relative to the building. So please don't use that view if you're actually trying to locate a site accurately. So now we're going to move on to spatial diversity. And so just as a quick comment, people use the term spatial diversity or space diversity. The two terms are used interchangeably. They mean the same thing, and so if you're used to one and not the other, then it doesn't matter. So the first question is there a reflection path? This is not something that LINKPlanner can do automatically for you, but we try and provide the tools to help you analyze the path. When you look at a path profile, if there's an area on the path which is smooth, then it's worth looking to see whether there are possible reflections. You can either right-click on the path profile, or from the menu bar when you're on the link, you can select the link option, and then in both cases select the Edit Reflection Parameters option that comes up, and then tick the Enable Reflection Mitigation box which is in the top of the reflection editor, shown in the bottom right of the screen. This will show the location and size of the reflection point on the path. If you want to change the height of the reflection point, for example to move it between the surface height and the worst earth height, which is the grey line shown on this lower profile, you can just adjust the value in the reflection surface height box. If you click in the box, you can use the up and down arrow keys to increase or reduce the height. If the Fresnel zone is very close to the surface in the reflection area, then the reflection will be contained within the Fresnel zone, and therefore no reflection point will be shown on the map, and the required spacing values will be empty in the reflection editor. In this example that we're looking at here, it shows we've got quite a smooth path for the entirety of the reflection zone, and hence we need to think more about how to mitigate the reflection. So the next question to ask is it possible to block the reflections? If the reflected path can't reach the antenna, then it can't cause us any problems. So trying to avoid it reaching the antenna is the first place to start. Changing the height of one or both ends of the link does two things. One, it moves the position of the reflection along the path. If you lower the antenna height at one end of the link, the reflection point moves towards that end of the link. Alternatively, if you raise the antenna, it will move towards the other end of the link. It may be possible to move the reflection point so that it coincides with land rather than water, or a more undulating piece of land. Moving the height of the antenna also changes the reflection path shown by the blue lines that come from the reflection point to each antenna location. In this example, reducing the height of the antenna at the right-hand side or remote end of the link changes the reflection path so that it now goes through the hill on the right-hand side of the link, but the main path and Fresnel zone remain clear. This has now blocked the reflection path in both directions and prevents it from interfering with the wanted line of sight path. So when we're talking about reflections, it's all about geometry. We can determine where the reflection point is going to be and its length based on the path geometry and the frequency, and hence we can also calculate the difference in path length between the direct path and the reflected path. This difference in path length can result in the reflected path being at a different phase from the direct path. When the two signals combine, they use both the magnitude and the phase of the signal. If the signals are both the same phase, then the signal will be enhanced. But if the signal is in antiphase, 180 degrees out of phase, then this can cause complete cancellation of the signal. Having two antennas in a diverse separation that have the right separation means that you can ensure that the paths to these two antennas will be in opposite phases from each other. Therefore, as the phase of the direct signal changes, at least one of the two antennas will always have a reflected path which is not in antiphase. Just looking at a question that's come in saying that he sees a link does not clear worst earth curvature. Sometimes where links already exist and other tools don't show the problem, is LINKPlanner just really conservative on those? So LINKPlanner tries, so if you just go back a point here, so we can, on here we can see a change in the worst earth curvature as shown by the grey line. This shows the amount of difference we expect in the curvature of the earth. If the Fresnel zone is cutting that worst earth curvature, then at some point the path will not be line of sight and it will vary. So that zone that we're showing there is taken from the ITU standards, and it's a 99.9%. It will be below that line, so that there's this sort of 0.1% time when it's likely to exceed that line. And at that point, then you will see additional path loss, excess loss on the path if you don't design your link to clear the worst earth curvature. Which sort of follows on to a question about how do we get the right antenna heights. You need to design the antenna height so that you clear that worst earth curvature. When it looks like you're trying to design a line of sight path in LINKPlanner, we will now put a warning up telling you if you haven't cleared worst earth curvature. So if you want to guarantee high availability, then you do need to ensure that you are clearing worst earth curvature. A little bit further down, we'll come on to show a pop-up menu you can show. So if you're running license band, there's a little info icon in the link summary. In that info icon, it will tell you what the excess path loss is if you haven't cleared the worst earth curvature. So LINKPlanner won't tell you the exact heights you need to have, but it will tell you if you haven't set the heights high enough to get those clearances. So there's added warnings in, and there's information in the information box about how much loss you could incur during those periods of time. So what separation is required in order to ensure that we can protect against the reflections? The reflection editor does the geometric calculations based on the path length, the antenna heights, the surface height, and the frequency to determine the separation that's needed at each end of the link. We'll look at our licensed and unlicensed band products in more detail shortly. The options you see are slightly different in the reflection editor, as licensed band requires diversity at both ends of the link, whereas unlicensed only requires diverse antennas at one end of the link. The multiplier option can be used to either change to a more convenient spacing for the physical installation, depending on the size of your antennas. Remember that the spacing shown is between the center line of the two antennas. So if you have two 6-foot dishes, you'll need to have a separation greater than 6 foot, otherwise you can't get the center line 6 foot apart. Even if you need to protect a link from reflections, you may also want to protect it against tropospheric fading. And in this case, you may need to use a larger multiplier to get the separation required to improve the availability for tropospheric fading. We'll discuss more on tropospheric fading shortly. So what's the impact of when you add a diverse antenna on a path with reflection? This is a chart showing a day's worth of logs from 2 independent paths on a PTP 650 link over water. One end of the link has been configured to the required separation to mitigate reflections. The 2 independent paths, individual paths, are the red and green, which in this case are the V and H paths. On a license band link, they would equally represent the 2 signals from a main and a diverse antenna. The blue signal is the composite signal from the 2 paths. We can clearly see on this chart that both of the 2 individual paths, the red and the green, fade during the course of the day. But when one path is in a deep fade, the other path isn't. This results in the composite signal being relatively stable, varying by only a couple of dB during the day, compared with the individual paths, which each experience 15 to 20 dB fades several times during the day. So just looking, sort of going back onto the worst earth curvature, the amount of curvature depends on the path length, and there's a chart in the ITU Rex that shows how the curvature varies according to path length. So LINKPlanner automatically builds in that calculation, and you will see the depth of the worst earth curvature vary depending on the length of the path. I can't give you sort of figures off the top of my head about exactly how much it is for a given path length, but it does increase the longer the paths are, so you will see a larger gap between the grey line and the earth the longer the path is. So just following on from the chart, we can see that from the composite signal that this is now very similar to a normal line of sight path. So the act of adding diversity with the correct spacing has mitigated the reflection issue, and the availability of the composite path is the same as that of an original line of sight path. So what we've done is we've taken away all the variability, so it doesn't really gain anything, but it takes away the variability. The fading on the individual paths we can see is very real, but the depth and frequency of those fades is very variable and not predictable. It will depend on the source of the reflection, but it's often weather dependent, and it can be affected by tides, geographic location, variations in Earth radius we've just been talking about, and therefore it's not possible to predict to actually predict a specific availability for a link which has reflections but no mitigation. Therefore, when you're using LINKPlanner, you need to verify a link to make sure that it doesn't have a reflection. But LINKPlanner will then help you and provide you with the tools to determine whether the reflection is in an area that's of concern and what the separation is required if you do need to put diversity in. So now we'll move on to the other typical manifestation of fading, which is tropospheric fading. Tropospheric fading happens when you get the right weather conditions, especially where there's an inversion in the temperature layers. That's when there's a warmer layer above a cooler layer. And this can often create a duct, so you often hear about tropospheric fading and ducting. Ducting is one form of tropospheric fading. In these cases, the radio waves between the 2 antennas can be scattered as they encounter the changes in refractivity in the atmosphere. So this means that you're kind of getting reflections, but you're getting lots of them, and they're appearing at different positions. So it's not a predictable. It's not like a reflective path off a surface, sort of off a lake, for example, which is a very understood and specific geometric path. The paths from tropospheric fading will produce scattered signals at different heights. This kind of fading is much more likely to happen at lower frequencies, and it's rare to see it above 11 gigahertz. It's also more on longer paths. There's a higher probability of the scattering zone developing. The geographic location also plays a significant part, as some parts of the world are more prone to such weather conditions. Coastal and desert areas are particularly prone. So we have areas such as the southeastern seaboard of the United States and the Gulf region in the Middle East are both areas which are particularly problematic. If you have a steep path where there's a big effective height difference between the two ends of the link, it's less likely to be affected. The layers tend to build up parallel to the ground, therefore a steep path travels across the layers rather than having long stretches trapped within the layer. And the same as for reflected paths, to mitigate this we need to add diversity with vertical spacing. But in this case it's not an absolute science, as I just said, on the particular separation that's required. And I think it's just worth emphasizing that point that when we always talk about diversity spacing, we're talking about vertical spacing and not horizontal spacing. Horizontal spacing is not going to mitigate against reflections or tropospheric fading. You must have the antennas one above the other and give yourself some vertical height. So as we said, it's not an exact science, so how do we predict how much improvement we can get? This is where we fall back on the standards and the algorithms taken from the ITUR P530 recommendation. This recommendation uses a number of factors which you can see here, and it's developed based on measurements taken on paths above 25 kilometers, 15 miles, for frequencies between 2 and 11 gigahertz, and with separations between 3 and 23 meters, so 10 to 75 feet. The multipath occurrence factor is a complex factor that takes into account geographic location as well as path length and frequency. The ITU version also takes into account the steepness of the path, which is one reason why the ITUR algorithm may sometimes provide better availability than the Vigans-Barnett algorithm, because it's taking into account and improving the availability the steeper the path is. Once a link's configured for spatial diversity, LINKPlanner will automatically run the improvement calculations and incorporate these into the predicted availability. Even if you've added diversity to protect against reflections, you may still see some improvement in the availability. But this is not based on an improvement for the reflection. It's because there's also some protection added against tropospheric fading. So the question that's often asked is about how much vertical separation should be applied. There isn't a straight single answer on this, as it depends on the area, the path length, and frequency. A rule of thumb that's often applied is that the antenna should be separated by 200 wavelengths. So at 5 gigahertz this would give you about a 12 meter, 40 foot spacing. At 11 gigahertz this reduces to 5.5 meters or 18 feet. There is an upper limit to the improvement factor. Once this is reached, it doesn't matter how much you increase the separation, you won't see any change. So when should you add diversity for tropospheric? This will depend on the type of link you're deploying and the link parameters. If the link's in an area which is known for tropospheric fading, then it may be standard to add it once links are above a certain length for the frequency band. If you're designing high availability links, then it's more likely that you will need to go to use diversity just to get your availability right. But if you can't get the availability you want, even when you increase the antenna dish sizes, then it's probable that diversity may help you. Remember that increasing the antenna dish size will only improve the availability until you reach the max receive level at the other end of the link. After that, the transmit power will be backed off to protect the other end of the link, and hence the fade margin will stay the same. So there are a few differences between the Cambium licensed band, 6 gigahertz and upwards, and the unlicensed band products in the way that they support diversity. So we'll start by taking a look at the licensed band. Cambium's licensed band radios are FDD, so frequency space diversity, and have a single data path in each direction. When we add diversity, we add a second receiver, but there's still only one active transmitter at each end of the link. This means that we must add diversity at both ends of the link. If we added it at only one end, then only that end of the link would have any diversity benefit. In the diagram, we can see that if we add diversity to the right-hand end of the link, then we will get both blue paths. But until we add it at the left-hand end of the link, we will only get one of the yellow paths. So it's very important when adding diversity for license band links that it's always added at both ends of the link. When the secondary receiver is added, the radio selects the best path using baseband switching. Thinking back to the plot of the two individual paths and the composite path, the selection of the best path results in the radio operating on that composite path. So how do we implement this actually in LINKPlanner? So for our PTP 820 range of products, we can support diversity on both the 820C and the 820G. On the 820C, simply select either 2+0 spatial diversity or 2+2 spatial diversity from the link type menu. PTP 820G is most commonly used on the links requiring spatial diversity and works the same as our earlier PTP 800 and 810 products. These products all base spatial diversity on top of the 1+1 hot standby configuration. So first select 1+1 hot standby from the link type menu, and then at each end of the link set the antenna configuration to spatial diversity. We'll take a closer look at this in an example. So in this example, we have a link which happens to be in Georgia, a known area for high levels of tropospheric fading. So even though I've set up this link with a maximum 6-foot dishes, the one-way availability required for the 200 megabits per second throughput is only 99.9661% and doesn't meet the target. So that means that, we need to now think, well, what else can we do to increase the availability of this link? So we change the link type to 1+1 hot standby and select spatial diversity at each end of the link. On the primary to primary path, the antenna heights are taken from the original 1+0 link and other heights of the main antennas. At this point, we can see that we have no diversity spacing as the secondary paths have been set up as a mirror of the primary paths. So we need to configure the secondary to secondary path. Select this path from the navigation tree on the left and then set the antenna heights for the diverse antennas to give the required antenna spacing. The two main diverse paths are going to be primary to secondary and secondary to primary. Although if you're also using the hot standby version of the 1+1 feature such that the transmitter may switch to the secondary, in this case you would also need to consider the secondary to secondary. So for all these paths that that are important paths for the performance, it's very important to confirm that they are all still line of sight. Any excess path loss on those links won't be accounted for in the improvement factor, and the actual improvement gain will not be as high as predicted. Going back to sort of the questions on the worst earth, then it can be acceptable to have some small worst earth incursion on these secondary paths because the likelihood of getting worst earth curvature and tropospheric multipath at the same time is going down in the probability stats. So if we now look at the performance, having added the diversity, we can now see that this has improved the performance from 99.966 up to 99.9975. So we're now meeting targets. So we've talked about the improvement factor. You can actually see what's been allocated as the improvement factor by selecting that info icon. And that will show you, it shows you the improvement factor at the lowest mode. So what we need to remember is that one of the factors in the improvement factor calculation is the fade margin, and the fade margin changes as we change the modulation mode. So with increasing modulation mode, the fade margin decreases, and hence the improvement factor will also decrease as the mode increases. But looking at this information, it will give you an idea if there's any further improvement that can be expected by increasing the separation, for example. In this case, this link's already at the maximum of 200 in the lowest mode. It's unlikely that there's much more improvement that can be made. As always, as often often a compromise to be made between the dish sizes, the separation, the physical space on the tower, as well as the cost. So when we were talking about where can we see the worst earth values, then again it's under this same menu. It's a little bit further down in the screen. So if you click on the info icon in here, the next few rows down will tell you how much impact there is on the worst earth due to worst earth and how much excess loss you're going to get. And you can see that on each of the 4 paths. So if you're really planning something that you want to be guaranteed high availability and you want absolute clearance, you can still try and ensure that your secondary to secondary path is also totally clear of the worst earth curvature. So now we'll finish off this by taking a look at unlicensed band. This is where we've obviously made a few changes in recent releases. So the unlicensed band radios are TDD radios and use 2x2 MIMO. So we have 2 transmitters and 2 receivers at each end of the link. The MIMO works to provide dual payload, i.e. 2 different data paths in each direction when the link conditions permit, but drops to duplicating the same data on both paths, giving only 1 data path in each direction when the link conditions degrade. This means that if we put spatial diversity at only one end of the link, we have diversity from the transmitted signal in one direction, and in the other direction the diversity is on the receive antennas. So in this case it's quite acceptable for us to only put diversity at one end of the link. We support spatial diversity on our PTP 650, 670 and 700 series of radios, as well as the oldest 500 and 600 radios. Spatial diversity is not supported on the EPMP and the PTP 450, 450i radios or in our PMP networks. So on the radios that do support it, at the moment in LINKPlanner, to activate spatial diversity for an unlicensed radio, you need to select a single polarization antenna from the list. These are the ones that you don't have a tick in the dual column on the left-hand side when you look at the antenna drop-down selection list, as shown in the image there. In our next release, we're going to introduce the ability to choose spatial diversity if the antenna selected is a dual polarized antenna, and you'll see an extra option pop up to allow you to make that selection. So for the moment, once you've selected a single polarization antenna, the diversity spacing will automatically appear, as well as an option to tick if you want to use the diversity to protect against reflections. If you need protection for both reflections and tropospheric fading, then still tick this box. The tropospheric improvement will still be included in the availability calculations. If you tick the reflection mitigation box, then set the diversity spacing to that shown in the reflection editor for that end of the link. Okay, just had a question asking if we can go back onto the previous slide on the unlicensed band. So what we're looking at here is because we have 2 transmitters as well as 2 receivers constantly running at both ends of the link, then the separation in one direction comes because we have 2 transmit signals that are coming from different different vertical spacings being received by the other end of the link. But in the other direction we have the transmission coming from one end but being received at 2 different ends. So there is a diversity spacing on the data path in both directions on the link, even though we've only put diversity spacing at one end of the link. So let's look at an example now from how we would use reflection on an unlicensed band. So we're going back to the link we were looking at earlier that has a reflection point on it. Let's just for the sake of argument now, assume that there's some reason at the right-hand end of the link, which means that it's not possible for us to drop the height of the antenna and block the reflected path. Therefore, the only thing we've got to do is be able to mitigate it by adding diversity. The reflection editor shows that the spacing is slightly smaller at the left-hand end of the link, so I've chosen that end. The decision about which end to use is often driven by the physical constraints on the towers. So whether there's enough space to add the second antenna, or costs, or based on size and height required. There's no benefit from the calculations as to using one end of the link or the other. It is much more down to the physics, the physicality of what you've got and what spacing you have. So as we're using diversity on this link to protect against reflections, I've ticked the reflection mitigation box and set the diversity to that given in the reflection editor. The big change that we've put into LINKPlanner in the last couple of releases is that when you're using diversity to mitigate reflections on an unlicensed radio, we only restrict performance to single payload modes. If you remember back to that plot of the two individual paths and the composite path, it's only the composite path where we can guarantee performance, and this path is the best of the V and H. Therefore, we can't guarantee to offer dual payload, one on V and one on H, different data on each path, as that requires both paths to be good. If you have dual payload enabled on your radio, then for the periods of time where both V and H are good, so in this case we're sort of defining good to be within about 7 dB of each other, the link will operate in dual payload and you will gain the benefit. But for the periods of time where one of the paths fades much more than the other, so that we have more than a 7 dB difference in receive level from each path, then the link will revert to single payload. And as we discussed previously, although we can determine the separation to ensure a good composite path, we can't determine the amount of time that the two paths will be within the required margin of each other to support dual payload, and therefore we can't guarantee an availability in the dual payload modes. And that's why, I understand that it's quite a big change, but what we didn't want to do was to be providing you with a guidance that said, yeah, we're going to guarantee you this amount of availability in a dual payload mode, because that is very difficult to do where there's a reflection. So now we'll look at the case we used for the license band, where we're now on a long link in an area that's got poor tropospheric fading, and so even with 6-foot dishes, this link can't meet the required throughput and availability. So in this case, we've added the diversity, but we've left the reflection mitigation box unticked, and I've set the antenna spacing to 10 meters. This is approximately 200 wavelengths for 5.8 gigahertz. We can see now that if we look at the performance for the required throughput, we're now meeting the level, so it all looks good. But let's take a more detailed look at the actual performance details that's on here. And so what we're actually seeing is that the availability of the dual payloads has decreased, but the availability of the single payloads has increased. And LINKPlanner uses the information about from the multipath occurrence factor of the geographic location and the impact on the path of how good that area is to make an adjustment to the amount of time we expect it to spend in single payload. So what we're seeing here is that although it's not as much as when we have a reflection path where we really can't predict it at all, we do know that the amount of time you're going to spend in single payload when you're in an area with high tropospheric fading, hence the need to put in spatial diversity, is going to be much higher. And at those times when the V to H ratio grows, we're only going to be able to support single payload. So the example that I used here was for a throughput that could be supported on single payload, and therefore we saw an improvement by adding diversity. If you put a very high requirement in on the throughput, then it's possible now in these versions of LINKPlanner that you will actually see you may see a slight reduction in performance, or you certainly won't see a lot of gain in performance when you add diversity. So you need to be aware that when you're adding diversity, if you need diversity and you rely on dual payload, it's going to be very difficult to guarantee that performance. So that's the end of the technical side of the LINKPlanner presentation. Just a quick reminder that we have a presence across social media, and you can keep up to date through any of these different methods. We also encourage everybody to share ideas. We've got a community forum on there. There's a specific LINKPlanner section to that forum and a knowledge base which you can follow. We post information on new releases to the forum where we try and give a lot more detail on, so yes, when you download the software, you get the sort of the official version of the release notes. On the forum, when we put a release out, we try and expand on that to give you a bit more information behind some of the changes. And if you've got any ideas of other topics you would like us to cover in the knowledge base, do let us know. Post your ideas for feature enhancements or any general queries, and don't forget, as I showed you earlier, we've got the LINKPlanner email address. It's on the front page when you start LINKPlanner or in the LINKPlanner user guides.
Great, thanks Rachel. And another bonus of the community page is that you can talk with real Cambium employee owners, real Cambium owners, and people who have used LINKPlanner and can help, as well as Cambium employees. That will we have people monitoring the community all the time to directly answer any questions you might have. If you don't have any closing remarks, thank you, Rachel, for that great presentation, and thank you, everyone who gave us your time to listen to the presentation.
Are there any other questions that are coming in? Again, if you want to post, you can either post them later. Hopefully this recording will be going up on the forum, and you can post in the press questions there as well, or drop them in to us and we'll be happy to answer them.
All right, well, I'm not seeing any questions yet, so yeah, if you have any questions, post them in the forum. When this video, it has been recorded and it will get posted to the forum, so if you think of any questions, you could post it in response to this video. All right. Oh, wait, hold on. We did get one. I will need to have a reference for single and multiple payloads in the knowledge form, if possible.
Okay, thanks for that information or query. Yeah, we'll add that to our list and putting them in. And
all right.
Yep.
Great.
And thank you all.
Thank you.